Hi, it's me, and welcome to yet another new target extraction overview for Limbus Company. The December 12, 2024 update brought a new target extraction with only a single new triple-aught ID in the manager of Manchaland, Don Quixote, one of the most powerful new IDs to date, designed for the bleed archetype. She's got quite a lot to go over, and if you like the design, I would definitely recommend pulling for her, or waiting until at least December 19th and sharding her, but there's a bit of a caveat or two. Firstly, from here on out, story IDs like this one will not be shardable until a week after their release. But don't worry, I will still be adding them to my company for public use, provided I actually manage to get them, so they'll still be available for you to use in the meantime. And if anybody didn't know, I do this as soon as the update drops. You don't need to wait until I release an overview video to be able to add me and use the new content right away. The uptie story for this ID also spoils the majority of the story for Canto 7. Why they decided to do this, I'm not sure, but if you haven't played Canto 7 and would like to experience the story unspoiled, I recommend either skipping the uptie story or just not using this ID in particular until you get to that point in the story. With those disclaimers out of the way, there's a lot to go over, and without further ado, let's jump into it. Firstly, a lot of the information about this first status effect is found throughout her 4 passives, so instead of going over every passive individually, I'm adding the relevant effects to the status itself, as it will be easier to understand the information that way, and none of these passives cost any resources to activate anyways. Just like the other Blood Fiend IDs, the manager of Manchaland Don Quixote has her own 3-stage status effect, though it doesn't change her appearance at all at higher stages. Hardblood increases the minimum and maximum speed values by 1 each for every 10 Hardblood you have, making her maximum potential speed be 7 to 10 when at 30 Hardblood, but you probably won't ever be at that much. Hardblood Stage 2 gives a 1 offense level up at turn start for every 5 Hardblood you have, and at Stage 3 it also gives an equal amount of defense level up. You can gain 2 Hardblood up to 3 times per turn whenever an ally either takes bleed damage or consumes Blood Feast as well, so she generates it very quickly if you have other Blood Fiend IDs in your party. Though it should be noted that no other ID can consume Blood Feast until Don Quixote does, though that should happen fairly quickly in a team designed around the status effect. If any allies from Manchaland have been defeated during the encounter, you also gain 1 additional Hardblood whenever it's gained, or if all 3 other Manchaland allies have been defeated, you gain 3 additional Hardblood instead. Hardblood also triggers her main other gimmick that Don Quixote has, and that's when you have 15 or more, you can utilize her enhanced Hardblood techniques. At the start of the turn, only her leftmost skill slot will automatically convert skills which can be used into their enhanced variant. Her skill 3 can always do this, however her other skills require another Blood Fiend ally to be in the party. Skill 1 requires the Priest of Manchaland Gregor, Skill 2 requires the Barber of Manchaland Otis, and her defense skill requires Princess of Manchaland Rodian. It is important to note that all of these skills consume Hardblood when empowered, so keep that in mind if you would rather build your team to allow Dawn to reach 20 plus Hardblood instead. There's another effect that is granted to Don Quixote once all 3 other Blood Fiend allies have been defeated, and that's Responsibility. It grants 1 clash power, 20% more damage dealt, but also makes her take 20% more damage. Realistically, you should never gain this effect in battle, but it is just a positive effect overall as long as Don Quixote isn't clashing over unbreakable coins. She's a very frail ID already, and that extra damage taken can cause her to spiral very quickly. If you're looking for a better way to increase her damage, her passive is a lot more reliable. Don Quixote gains 1 damage up every turn for every 15% of her HP that is missing, and while she does heal a lot with her skills, this effect does trigger at turn end for the next turn. Every time Don Quixote kills an enemy or destroys an abnormality part, Blood Feast is also increased by 10% of that enemy's or part's max HP, up to 100 per turn. A lot of challenging enemies will fill that 100 Blood Feast very quickly, meaning Don Quixote is actually really good at sustaining your Blood Feast. Lastly, every other ally gains a once per encounter effect that prevents them from being killed specifically from bleed damage for an entire turn. This is most likely to affect her other Blood Fiend allies, but certain enemy types do inflict quite a lot of bleed, so this can be pretty helpful in fights against those types of enemies, such as the Kurakumo clan, pirates, or any Blood Fiend enemies. The last of the 3 new status effects that Don Quixote brings is called Shimmering Blood Fiend. This is a unique effect that has a maximum value of 50. Immediately as it is applied, the unit that gains it gains shield equal to its value. Bleed damage taken to the shield HP is usually not going to contribute to Blood Feast, however this effect allows it to, while also providing the necessary shield in order to use it. It's useful to help mitigate the self-bleed damage other Blood Fiend IDs will take, but ultimately doesn't matter too much in the long run. Shimmering Blood Fiend is applied to your allies by Don Quixote's defense skill, Laughters Shall Subside, a 5-13 rolling Pierce Lust clashable counter with 2 coins. It is applied to one ally in an amount equal to the combined amount of Blood Feast consumed by all units, then divided by 50, up to a maximum of 15. The skill is also Don's only consistent way to inflict bleed count, and while that's usually not great on a bleed ID, you can just have the rest of your party focus on inflicting count instead. Plus, this is an on-demand way to inflict bleed count, and it being a Lust skill means it synergizes incredibly well with the rest of the bleed team by helping with resonance effects. It's also a rare defense skill that can actually gain her stacking effect, giving up to 5 hard blood by consuming Blood Feast. If the Princess of Manchaland Rodian is in the party, this skill can be empowered into variant Sancho Hardblood Arts 15 build up to finale. A 6-16 rolling Pierce Lust clashable counter with 2 coins, one of which being Unbreakable. Yes, this is the first ID to have Unbreakable coins on its skills, though she's so frail that they should almost never matter if you lose a clash. This skill inflicts 1 more bleed count than its alternative, plus it grants Shimmering Blood Fiend to at minimum 3 allies instead of just 1, increasing by your highest resonance. Ultimately, this skill isn't too important to empower, but Princess Rodian is so good that you'll probably have it as an option anyways. Enough is Enough is a 3-11 rolling Pierce Sloth skill with 2 coins, though it can become up to a 3-15 if the target has enough bleed. This skill isn't anything special, being similar to the other Blood Fiend skill ones in that it forces some bleed damage if you can't consume Blood Feast, and grants hard blood by consuming that Blood Feast. It actually inflicts a pretty good amount of bleed for a skill 1, and the small amount of healing it provides is pretty helpful if Don ends up taking bleed damage. If the Priest of Manchaland Gregor is in the party, this skill can be empowered into variant Sancho Hardblood Arts 9 Whip, a 4-13 rolling Pierce Sloth skill with 3 coins, 2 of which being Unbreakable, though it can become a 4-19 if the target has enough bleed. This skill being empowered becomes significantly stronger in roll, damage, and effects. It heals more, contributes to Blood Feast more by forcing her to gain 20 bleed, and inflicts up to double the amount of bleed as the regular skill. Uniquely, the last coin also force triggers the target's bleed. This skill does have one other effect that is tucked away inside Don Quixote's Blood Feast passive, which prevents her from being killed by bleed damage on the turn that the skill will be used on, so you needn't be afraid of that 20 bleed damage. At the cost of only 10 hard blood, this skill gains quite a lot of value from being empowered, and Priest Gregor becomes one of her best allies as a result. Let All Blossom Free is a 4-16 rolling Pierce Wrath skill with 2 coins that can become a 4-20 if the target has enough bleed. While this skill isn't great for inflicting bleed, the main draw is its ability to gain up to 2 attack weight if Don has enough hard blood. This by itself makes it a really good skill for damage, plus the second coin can deal as much as double damage if the target has enough bleed, and enough Blood Feast has been consumed this battle. It's also important to note that while this skill gains weight from having enough hard blood, it doesn't actually spend any, plus it gains some hard blood on use by consuming Blood Feast. If the Barber of Manchaland Otis is in the party, this skill can be empowered into variant Sancho Hardblood Arts 8 Split Apart, a 4-13 rolling Pierce Wrath skill with 3 coins, one of which being Unbreakable, and 2 attack weight, though it can become a 4-19 if the target has enough bleed. While this skill can reach 1 higher attack weight than its non-empowered version, inflicts double the bleed, and has an additional coin, the differences this skill has in comparison to its original are fairly marginal. It can hit really hard, however you need at least one skill that can't be empowered if you want your hard blood to be able to stack high, and this skill consumes your hard blood in order to gain attack weight, unlike its previous version. This is the best skill to lose out on if you plan to bring a bleed team with several Blood Fiends in the party. I Shall Impale is a 5-17 rolling Pierce Lust skill with 3 coins that can become a 5-23 if the target has enough bleed. This skill has a lot of additional damage effects, and is best used as a way to finish enemies off if used without being empowered. Gaining 10 hard blood and also increasing Blood Feast by 60, plus however much it's increased by our passive, means this is an excellent kill tool. Ironically, the 2 clash power it can gain from the conditional doesn't really matter that much. Plus, just like all of her other skills, this one can actually gain Hard Blood, which sets it apart from the skill 3s of all the other Blood Fiend IDs we currently have. This skill can be empowered into Ascendant Sancho Hard Blood Arts La Sangre, regardless of who is in the party. It's a 5 to 25 rolling Pierce Lust skill with 4 unbreakable coins, and can become up to an 8 to 39 with enough Hard Blood and enemy bleed. It has the same damage conditionals as the regular skill, making it one of the highest damaging skills in the game if you use it at its full potential. While it does consume your Hard Blood in multiples of 10, getting a kill with it will also increase your Blood Feast by 100 and refund half of the spent Hard Blood, and it's pretty likely to get that kill. While the last coin inflicts 4 bleed count, it also inflicts 1 bleed count and 5 bleed to all enemies if that final coin manages to get the kill. Frankly, it also has one of the coolest animations in any skill in the game, and there will basically never be a moment where using it is not a good idea. Rule of cool definitely applies with this one. Her support passive is potentially very strong, increasing damage by 30% for an ally who is missing 60% or more of their max HP. If they're a Blood Fiend, they only need to be missing 45% or more, and this effect will usually apply to Priest Gregor due to his tendency to quickly lose 200 HP before gaining it back again the next turn. That being said, it's going to be very situational regardless, but is a universal passive that should always be a good option if you don't know what else to take. Due to not having any Pride resources and her non-defense Lust skill being skill 3, she doesn't feel any of her ego perfectly, though the counter can help to sustain that small amount of Lust generation. You'd assume that Yearning Merkala would be a great ego to pair with her, and it is, but its high cost and reliance on other team members to fuel, specifically the required 3 Gluttony, means that you probably won't be using it super often. The ego that she fuels the best is actually Wishing Karen, missing only the 1 Pride required for its use. The combination of the 3 attack weight plus the fact that it inflicts 4 bleed count means that it's actually very solid as a way to supplement her admittedly lackluster count infliction. She can technically fuel Lifetime Stew by herself, and since bleed teams generate a lot of lust, using it repeatedly can add up to a lot of damage very quickly. Probably less damage than the ID itself can deal though, at least in a bleed team. And lastly, her base ego inflicts a lot of bleed potency, and helps to supplement her healing if she ends up needing to come back from low HP. The passive actually gives better healing than any of her own skills if the enemy has high pierce resistances too. While you might be tempted to include the other 3 Blood Fiend IDs by themselves and call it a day while building a team for this ID, you're definitely going to want to exclude at least one of them. Having the option to use a non-empowered skill in order to build up more Hard Blood is a pretty good thing to have. And since you're probably going to be doing a bleed team, the best one to leave behind is Barber Otis. She doesn't have a great deal of bleed infliction, and her only big benefit is having a Gluttony skill 1 in order to help fuel Yearning Merkala. That being said, Priest Gregor and Princess Rodian are both very solid team members for Manager Don Quixote. The increased power on skill 1 is a lot more than the increased power on skill 2, and Gregor's ability to catapult your Blood Feast means you'd want him alongside any other Blood Fiend IDs anyways. And since using the defense skill is always voluntary, bringing Princess Rodian along with her insane boost to other Blood Fiend teammates is always going to be incredibly useful. If you're looking for more potential Blood Feast contribution, Rhino Merceau can inflict a lot of bleed count, and also has the only other ego in the game which can directly contribute to Blood Feast in some way in Yearning Merkala. Rhino Merceau also inflicts a very surprising amount of bleed potency if you have the support passives of Kurakuma Honglu and Ryoshu as support passives. To be fair, Kurakuma Ryoshu is also a really good unit if you're looking for more bleed count, plus she fuels Don's Yearning Merkala very well. The usual bleed suspects of Ringy, Sang, and Otis alongside N Faust can also work very well for increasing your bleed count, and all 3 do a lot to boost your damage with Don Quixote as a result. Hook Honglu always works as a viable addition to any bleed team due to his good sin affinities and high bleed count infliction, so if you got him from Volpurgisnacht, don't be afraid to put him in. Pequod Heathcliff can also inflict a really good amount of bleed count, and has great sin affinities to assist in fueling a lot of your most important ego. That said, he doesn't provide a lot of good ego for a bleed team himself, and lacking a lust skill will hurt him in the long run. Lastly, the combination of her sin affinities and access to Lifetime Stew make her a very good substitute member for a burn team. Wrath and Lust are both very helpful for that team setup, and Sloth is one of the sin affinities that's quite necessary but also pretty rare to find on actual burn IDs. Well, The good ones, anyways. While that's all there is to say about the ID itself, I want to take this moment to give my opinion on how IDs have been recently. I don't think it's stretching to say that this is one of the most mechanically deep IDs in recent memory. The first ID to have more than 5 skills total, the first ID to have unbreakable coins, it has so many effects obscured by all of its passives, and also brings in 3 new status effects. While it's rightfully incredibly strong, all the effects on this essentially add up to better power and damage, and not much else, which is why I spent pretty little time talking about each skill individually. Limbus Company has a combat system that you can go into quite a bit of depth with if you try to. Identities that were released some time ago are still useful to this day because of that, such as Talisman Sinclair, Rabbit Heathcliff, literally any Tremor ID in the game, and etc. However, the majority of content doesn't really give you any reason to associate with this depth. Since the 4th Valpurgis knock, the majority of IDs have had high enough clash power and damage to clear any content in under the amount of turns Project Moon expects you to, including clearing Refraction Railway about 25 turns under par with very little strategy. That said, the depth that's been added in recent memory trends towards stuff that bloats text for no reason. We haven't received an update that adds new IDs or ego that doesn't also add at least one brand new status effect to worry about since the ring IDs near the beginning of Season 4. And keeping track of all these statuses is not easy to do, even for someone like me who basically studies this game constantly. I honestly believe that newer IDs have been made too complicated for the majority of players to be able to recognize how to use them in a team. That said, newer IDs also trend towards being a lot more powerful, and let me get things clear, I don't really mind power creep in this context. With the story content becoming more difficult, it's a good thing that players have powerful generic units to be able to experience the story with. But at the same time, let's look at Devyat Sinclair again, an ID that is incredibly powerful both in it and out of its own archetype provided you do a little team building to support it, with very high rolls and incredibly high damage for any team. But it's pretty much universally panned because of how he functions when an enemy has high rupture. Part of this is honestly the fault of the players being unwilling to associate rupture with anyone other than Talisman Sinclair, which is completely fair to be honest. That ID is insanely good in the team and honestly is a really well designed ID that actually rewards players for engaging with the deeper mechanics of this game, so I can't fault anybody for believing that. In my opinion, we need to receive more IDs like the ones we got during the interim months of Season 2. IDs like Liu Ishmael, Diechi Rodion, W. Corpi Sang, as well as some early Season 3 IDs like Middle Don Quixote and Magic Bullet Otis, all of whom are unquestionably powerful, but give the player tangible rewards for interacting with their mechanics and aren't just an ID you can throw into any team and watch them outroll everything and deal insane amounts of damage. While they aren't the most powerful IDs in the game, they are all still used a good amount in their respective teams, and that isn't just because of their roles or high status infliction. Having more IDs like this would also encourage players to experiment with their team building, the most interesting aspect of the gameplay of this game in my opinion. And that's about all I have to say for this video. Thanks for watching, and sorry you have to listen to that short rant that I had. If you enjoyed, I'd appreciate if you liked and subscribed as it helps me out a lot. If you want to try out the new ID with the best ego equipped, either because you haven't gotten her yet or because you're waiting to shard her, I'm sure there's like 2 days left before you can do that at the time of this upload, feel free to add me on Limbus Company. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope to see you again soon.